Before I enrolled in Designlab's bootcamp, I wondered, could my savings really get me through the full-time track? Should I quit my current job over this? And how many hours was this really going to take? And when was I actually going to finish? I wish back then I had someone who could tell me a more realistic timeline, so I could better prepare for my finances, my schedule, I guess my whole life. Well, guess what? What? Today in this video, I'm going to help compare and contrast between the two tracks, part-time and full-time, and we're gonna look at how Designlab defines those two. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's said, so we'll go over that in this video today. And then at the end of the video, I'm gonna share with you my experience on how and why I chose the track that I did and what ended up happening, because I kind of had one of those expectations versus reality type moments. So stick around and let's get started. I want to quickly note that I ended up choosing the part-time track, so I do have a lot more direct experience with this one. I'm going to pull up an article that I found on Designlab. First of all, they define part-time as 20 hours of coursework each week. Now, whenever we start to involve timelines or how long things are going to take, I think that's when things get a little bit tricky and they're not really as realistic of what's actually going to happen, because a lot of variables are involved depending on what kind of learning style you prefer or your learning pace, and also whatever's going on in your life at that time. When I was in the part-time course, it was really more like 30 to 40 hours a week. Based on this page here, it says that the part-time track might be for you if you need to balance UX Academy with other time commitments like working a job more than half time. This one for me is 100% true. When you choose the part-time track, you're most likely choosing it because you have other time commitments, whether that's another full-time job, or you have a family to take care of, or you have a lot of vacations or things coming up. Regardless, it just means that you can't give Designlab 100% of your time while you're enrolled. The next bullet point that Designlab mentions is that you are okay with the course taking 6 months rather than 3. I don't necessarily agree with this timeline that Designlab provided, because it wasn't the case for me. And to be completely honest, I knew other students who did not complete it within the same 6 months on the part-time track as well. You have to think about all the other things that go into you finishing Designlab. For me at least, it was a steep learning curve and just doing something new and being a student again and balancing your job on top of your personal life. It's a lot, and I think on top of that too, a lot of students forget that the portfolio is the biggest thing that sucks up a lot of your time. It's essentially you branding yourself to put yourself out there for a job, but a lot of people want to perfect it. So you end up taking a really long time, and that's not included in this timeline. What's also probably not included in this timeline is career services. And then what's definitely not included in this timeline is when you're actually gonna get your first UX design job. So total from when I first started Designlab all the way to getting my first UX design job, it took me 10 months. That's just something to consider, especially when you're trying to estimate and project how long this whole journey is really going to take. I wouldn't take Designlab's 6-month completion as face value. You really have to think about everything else that might be involved. And the last bullet point that Designlab included for part-time is that you would prefer to study flexibly and at your own pace. I know that I wanted to learn at a steady pace, especially given that I had another job that I had to commit to. So I didn't really want to go at a really intensive, fast pace. So if you're someone who wants to take your time and wants to be a little bit more flexible, then I definitely recommend the part-time track. Now that we've done part-time, let's move on to the full-time track. So first and foremost, Designlab defines full-time as 40 hours a week of coursework in their syllabus. Right off the bat, that is a lot of work. Imagine your 40-hour week job that you have right now, and that's just gonna be strictly Designlab. That's really intense. And then that goes into the first bullet point that Designlab mentions, and they say the full-time track might be for you if you have a schedule clear of other major time commitments. Now that is 100% true. Like I mentioned, if you are going for the full-time track, make sure you have nothing else going on, like straight up nothing on your calendar that you can see coming through the horizon, because you're going to be doing Designlab day and night, and it's going to be a really fast learning environment. The second bullet point that Designlab mentions is you are highly motivated to complete the course within 3 months. It's kind of interesting that they say you're highly motivated, meaning like this is up to you if you want to get this done. 3 months is really tight, but that is why Designlab has the switching policy in place where you're eligible to switch from full-time to part-time within phase 1. And you definitely want to do that before phase 2 starts for Designlab, because once phase 2 starts, it gets way more intense and you already by that time want to establish like a good relationship with your mentor and a good learning cadence for yourself. So if you feel like in the first week or so, or even like the first month, you feel like full-time's not for you, just switch, because I think that's just a safer way to go. And I think by that time you would know too. The last bullet point that Designlab mentions for full-time track is you are experienced and confident at independent learning. You have to be really comfortable with working at a super fast pace and learning at a really fast pace. The only thing that I was like, what about was the independent learning. Maybe I'm just like, I don't know, stupid and I don't get it, but you are not learning alone. Like with the full-time track, you get all the same resources you would in the part-time track. You still have access to the Slack community, all the curriculums, and if anything, you actually meet with your mentor 2 times a week versus 1. So maybe that just means you're willing to independently be really good at managing your time, because I think with the full-time track, that's super important. Now, there's just one thing that I think Designlab failed to mention here. That is finances. If you're willing to go with the full-time track, you have to be willing to be able to financially support yourself through these next, 3 to 6 months of going with the full-time track, knowing that it may take you more than what they stated on getting that first UX design job. At least for me, I don't think it would be possible to do the full-time track if I didn't quit my job, so I don't know what other source of income would be going on. But in order to do the full-time track, it's really important to look at your savings, know that you have enough to support yourself in this time that you're intensively learning UX, because I think that's a huge factor in determining whether or not you want to do part-time or full-time. Now, I want to share with you my personal experience on which track I ended up taking and what ended up happening. The first few weeks were totally fine with the workload. I was working my 40-hour-a-week account manager job here in San Diego at an agency, and then I would come home on the weekdays and do some Designlab assignments here and there, and then a bit over the weekend, but not by much. And I would say at that point in the beginning, it definitely was that 20 hours a week. But then sometime I would say during like the wireframe phase, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm burning out. I went into it being like, okay, part-time means 20 hours a week, but if I looked at my schedule every day, that was not the case at all. It was 8 a.m. to 5 a.m. I'd be at work, including commute and whatnot. And then I get home and maybe I'd work out here and there, and then I'd make dinner. So I'd be done around 7:30. And then I would work from that time to midnight on Designlab every day, Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, I put kind of my personal life on hold so I could do more. And I worked on Designlab probably 5 to 10 hours each on Saturday and Sunday. So if you do the math, which I'm not very good at math, but it's about like that 20 hours during the weekdays, and then you add the weekend time, and that gets you around 30 to 40 hours, plus my 40-hour full-time job. So case in point, like I was drowning. I went to my employer at the time, and I basically was like, look, I need to scale back at work. And luckily they were super nice about it, and they're like, sure, why don't you go to 30 hours a week? And then you can work more on your course. So I ended up switching the balance, and then I basically made Designlab in some way full-time, because then I was working on it like 50 hours a week, which is insanity, because even in phase 2, it got even crazier. That's just the sacrifice I had to take, and like, yeah, that means I got a pay cut at work too. But this is something I definitely didn't have planned, and it was kind of an annoyance because I didn't expect it when I first enrolled in Designlab. I definitely didn't go into it being like, I know at some point I'm gonna get a pay cut at work and I'm gonna scale back to almost part-time. Another thing I wanted to mention too about boot camps is that you really only get what you put into it, and that definitely affects how much work you're going to be putting in while you're enrolled in any sort of boot camp. And I feel like this really affected my schedule during the week as well while I was in Designlab, because yes, I was working on those standard 20 hours a week assignments, but I also was pushing myself and working and going the extra mile and adding an extra 10 hours a week. I was listening to podcasts, reading design books, like going to hackathons, trying to do design challenges, like anything I could, because that is a huge leg up for once you start looking for your first UX design job, is just not going through the basic assignments. I think for me personally, if I was in full time and I was doing 40 hours a week, which to be honest, like with my learning style, now that I know my pace, it probably would turn into 60 hours a week, and then plus maybe an extra 10 hours for extra stuff outside of boot camp. That honestly sounds like I'm not gonna have a life. Like when am I even supposed to eat? When am I even supposed to do anything? So that would have been really hard for me. But again, there could be some students out there, people out there that are really quick at learning. Maybe that's just not me. So I hope my story was a little bit more helpful for you to understand how unrealistic some of these timelines that we are given are. I hope in no way am I trying to discourage you from going with one track or the other. Again, it's really up to you and your life and what you have going on. But for me, that's the track I took, and I don't regret it. I just definitely was shocked at how intensive it really was. And if you're interested in Designlab's UX Academy, I have a link down below my description so you can go and check it out. Wait, one more thing. If you want more transparency on Designlab, make sure you check out this video. It's my honest review of Designlab's bootcamp. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.